He spent his last $150 on a crate nobody dared to open. 3 weeks later, he was supposed to lose everything. His farm, his home, his future. Everyone thought he had lost his mind standing in that muddy auction yard, betting his final dollars on something marked only with one word, keep. But what he found inside was a secret hidden for 70 years, a secret that would turn a desperate man into someone who could change not only his life, but someone else's too. Please support us by subscribing to the channel and drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from. On a cold October morning in 1991, just outside a quiet farming town in Nebraska, a man named Samuel Carter stood in a muddy auction yard, staring at something no one else would even touch. It was a crate, old, dark, and heavy with time. About 3 feet tall, bound in rusted steel, with a lock so corroded it looked like it had sealed its secrets decades ago. Folks had walked past it all morning, shaking their heads like it carried bad luck. Samuel didn't have the luxury of superstition. At 47 years old, his life was unraveling. The bank had already sent the final notice. 3 weeks, that's all he had left before they took his land. The same land his mother had worked until her hands gave out. His wife had moved in with her sister, taking their daughter with her. The house was quiet now. Too quiet. And in his pocket, just $150. The last of it. He wasn't even supposed to be bidding that day. He came looking for answers, maybe even a miracle. But something about that crate, it wouldn't let him look away. Maybe it was the silence around it. Or maybe it was something deeper, something that felt like it had been waiting. Now, to understand why Samuel Carter would risk his last $150 on a crate nobody wanted, you have to go back a few years, to a time when things still made sense. Back to 1988. Samuel wasn't rich, but he was steady. He owned 180 acres of good Nebraska soil flat land, the kind that held water just right and gave back what you put into it. His mother, Margaret Carter, had left it to him when she passed. No debt, no mortgage, just land, and the quiet pride that came with it. She used to say something he never forgot. If you take care of the land, it'll take care of you. For a while, that was true. But the world changed faster than Samuel did. Banks started offering loans that sounded like opportunity. Farming magazines talked about expansion, bigger yields, newer machines. Everyone said the same thing: if you don't grow, you fall behind. So Samuel did what many men in his position did. He trusted them. He took out a loan, bought another 120 acres, invested in a brand new combine that cost more than anything his family had ever owned. At first, it felt like progress, like he was building something bigger than what he inherited. But then the prices dropped. Corn went from profit to barely breaking even. Then worse, interest rates climbed like they had no ceiling. Payments didn't shrink, but his income did. Month by month, season by season, the math stopped working. And once the math stops working, everything else follows. By early 1991, Samuel was behind. Not just a little, but enough that the bank stopped calling him Mr. Carter and started calling him delinquent. 3 letters, each one colder than the last. The final one didn't ask. It told, pay or lose everything. That's how he ended up at that auction. Not to buy, not really. Men like Samuel didn't go to auctions to shop. They went to watch what happens when a life gets taken apart, piece by piece. The auction that day was for a man named Harold Whitaker, who had farmed that land for over 60 years before passing away. No children, no one to carry it on. So the county stepped in, and like always, everything had to go. Tools, equipment, furniture, even the things that still felt personal. If you've ever stood at a farm auction like that, you know the feeling. It's not loud like a market. It's quiet in a different way. Heavy, like everyone's thinking the same thing, but no one says it out loud. This could be me. Samuel stood near the back, hands deep in his jacket, trying not to look too long at anything. But then, they dragged out the crate. It had been buried in the far corner of Harold's barn, under years of dust and things nobody cared to sort through. Took 2 men to move it. When they set it down, something inside shifted metal against metal. A dull, hollow sound. That got people's attention. For a moment. Then the auctioneer started. Lot 112. Wooden crate. Contents unknown. Sold as is. Who'll give me 20? Nothing. He dropped to 10. Still nothing. People didn't just ignore it. They avoided it. Like there was something wrong with it. Like opening it might bring trouble that wasn't worth inviting. Samuel couldn't explain it. But he couldn't look away either. There was a marking on the side, barely visible beneath layers of grime. He stepped closer, squinting. W.O. 1921. Keep. Keep. The word sat in his chest heavier than it should have. He thought about his mother, about the way she kept things not because they were valuable, but because they meant something. He thought about Harold Whitaker, a man who had lived through hard times nobody talked about anymore. And he thought about himself, standing there with $150 and nothing left to lose. The auctioneer was about to move on. Last call. Anyone $10? Samuel felt his heart start to pound. Not fast, just heavy. Like each beat was asking him a question. What if this is something? What if it isn't? What if this is your last chance? At anything. Before he could think it through, before logic had time to catch up. He raised his hand. Source. 150. The yard went silent. Not surprised silence. The kind of silence people fall into when they're watching a man make a decision they know he can't take back. The auctioneer blinked. Did you say $150? Samuel swallowed. Cash. A man nearby let out a quiet laugh. Not cruel, just certain. Certain that Samuel Carter had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The auctioneer looked around once more. No one spoke. No one moved. Then he nodded. Sold? And just like that, Samuel Carter had traded his last $150 for a crate nobody dared to open. Samuel Carter didn't open the crate that day, or the next. He brought it home in the back of his old pickup, the same truck that rattled every time it crossed a gravel road, and left it sitting in the corner of his barn like something unfinished. Like a sentence waiting for its last word. That night, the house felt emptier than usual. No footsteps upstairs, no soft hum from the kitchen, just the ticking of a clock that suddenly sounded too loud. He sat at the table, staring at his hands. $150 gone. No plan, no explanation. Just a crate. When his brother, Daniel Carter, stopped by the next morning, he didn't even try to hide the concern on his face. You really did it? Daniel asked, leaning against the barn door, eyes fixed on the crate. Samuel nodded once. Daniel walked around it slowly, like it might move if he got too close. You don't even know what's in there. I know, Samuel said quietly. And you spent everything you had left. Another nod. Daniel exhaled, long and heavy. Sam, this isn't like buying a used tractor. You're 3 weeks from losing everything. Samuel didn't answer, because there wasn't anything he could say that would make sense. Not to Daniel, not even to himself. That crate stayed closed for 3 days. 3 long days where Samuel walked past it a dozen times, sometimes stopping, sometimes reaching toward the lock, then pulling his hand back like he wasn't ready to know the truth yet. Because once it was open, there was no going back. On the 4th morning, the sky was gray, the kind of gray that settles into your bones. Samuel sat on an overturned bucket, a cup of cold coffee in his hands, staring at the crate like it might speak first. That's when he noticed it. A small metal plate near the bottom edge, almost hidden under years of dirt. He wiped it clean with his sleeve. The engraving was faint, but still there. Property of Midwestern Trust Bank. Secure transfer. Case number 42. Samuel felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just a crate. This was something meant to carry things people didn't leave behind. He stood up slowly, heart beginning to thud, not fast, but deep. The lock was still there, rusted shut like it had been holding its breath for decades. He tried the keyhole again. Useless. He could have cut it, but something about the word keep on the side, it stopped him. So instead, he went to his mother's old toolbox. Inside, beneath layers of worn tools and folded cloth, was a small leather pouch. Lockpicks. His mother had kept them, though she'd never said why. "Sometimes things don't open the easy way," she once told him. It took him nearly 2 hours. 2 hours of careful pressure, of feeling the tiny pins inside the lock resist and then give, one by one. His hands shook more than once. Twice he almost quit. But then, a sharp click, loud enough to echo in the quiet barn. Samuel froze. For a moment, he just stared at the lock, like it might close itself again. Then slowly, he lifted the lid. The smell came first. Old paper, oil, thyme. The inside was lined with faded cloth, brittle at the edges, and resting on top, a piece of burlap, pinned to it. A note. Samuel's fingers hesitated before picking it up. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. The kind of writing that came from someone who chose every word. He read it out loud, barely above a whisper. "To whoever finds this, I put these away when the world didn't make sense anymore. Thought I might need them someday. Turns out, I never did. Maybe you will." W. April 3rd, 1921. Samuel swallowed hard. There was something about those words. Not hopeful, not sad. Just honest, like a man speaking across time to someone he'd never meet. With trembling hands, Samuel lifted the burlap. Beneath it, tools. Old ones, wrenches, pliers, a hand drill worn smooth from use. Nothing special, nothing worth $150. His chest tightened. Was this it? Was this what he had gambled everything on? He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding, and started pulling the tools out one by one, setting them gently on the floor. The crate slowly emptied, and for a moment, it felt like all he'd done was confirm what everyone else already believed. That he'd made a mistake. But then, at the very bottom, his hand brushed against something different. Not wood, not cloth. Metal. Cold, heavy, wrapped carefully, like it mattered. Samuel stopped. His heartbeat slowed, then deepened again. He peeled back the final layer. And there it was. A small steel box. Unmarked. Unassuming. But somehow. It felt like the real reason the crate had been waiting all these years. Samuel lifted it carefully, both hands gripping tighter than they needed to. Because deep down, he already knew. Whatever was inside that box was going to change everything. Samuel Carter didn't open the metal box right away. He just stood there, holding it. It wasn't large, about the size of an old lunch tin, but it felt heavier than it should have, like it carried more than just weight. Like it carried years, decades, maybe even someone else's unfinished life. He set it down slowly on the workbench, his hands lingering on the lid as if letting go too quickly might somehow break whatever moment this was. The barn was quiet. Too quiet. Even the wind outside seemed to have stopped, like the whole world had leaned in, waiting. Samuel finally exhaled and lifted the latch. It opened easier than the outer crate. No resistance, no fight. Almost like it had been waiting. Inside. Paper? Stacks of it, carefully arranged, tied with twine that had turned brittle with age, some in folders, some loose, all of it old, very old. Samuel picked up the first document. It was thick, official-looking, with seals pressed into the corners and lettering that had faded but not disappeared. He frowned slightly, eyes scanning the top line. United States Treasury Certificate. That alone made him pause. But then he saw the number, and his breath caught. $10,000? He blinked once. Then again, slowly, as if afraid the number might change if he looked too quickly. But it didn't. His fingers began to tremble as he reached for the next one. Another certificate? Then another. And another? Each one? The same. Each one real. Samuel's chest tightened, not with panic, but something deeper, something harder to name. Hope, the kind that feels dangerous. Because if it's real, it changes everything. He kept going. Beneath the certificates were stock papers, companies he didn't recognize, names from another time. Then a folded document stamped with a state seal. He opened it carefully. A land deed. Oil rights? Texas? Samuel sat down without meaning to. The wooden stool creaked under his weight as the reality of what he was holding began to settle in. This wasn't junk. This wasn't forgotten clutter. This was a life someone had carefully packed away and never came back for. At the very bottom of the box, there was one more item. A letter, folded neatly, addressed to Harold Whitaker. Samuel opened it slowly, smoothing the paper flat against the table. The ink had faded, but the words were still there. Mr. Whitaker, as requested, we have secured the assets transferred from your uncle's estate. Given the current financial instability, we strongly advise against placing these holdings in any bank at this time. The total estimated value, as of this date, is approximately $92,000. Your uncle was a cautious man. That caution may now prove to be your greatest inheritance. We recommend keeping these documents in a secure place until such time as the economy stabilizes. Respectfully, Elliott and Graves Law Office. April 1921. Samuel read it twice, then a third time, each word settling deeper than the last. $92,000 in 1921. He didn't know the exact math, but he knew enough to understand one thing. That kind of money, left untouched for 70 years, didn't just grow, it transformed. His mind tried to catch up, but it couldn't. Not fully. Not yet. Because something else had taken hold. Something quieter. He looked back at the note pinned to the burlap. Maybe you will? Samuel leaned back, staring at the ceiling of the barn, at the wooden beams worn smooth by time. Why hadn't Harold used it? Why hide something like this? Through wars, through hardship, through a lifetime of working the land. Why keep it and never come back? The question stayed with him. But slowly, another answer began to take its place. Maybe it wasn't about the money. Maybe it never was. Maybe Harold had seen something, lived through something, that made him believe timing mattered more than possession. That having something, and using it, weren't always the same thing. Samuel looked down at his hands again. The same hands that, just days ago, had nothing left to hold. And now, they held a second chance. Not guaranteed, not easy, but real. For the first time in months, Samuel didn't feel like a man running out of time. He felt like a man standing at the edge of something. Something fragile, something powerful, something that could either save him or slip through his fingers if he didn't move carefully. And that's when it hit him. This wasn't luck. Not yet. This was responsibility. Because what he did next would decide everything. Samuel Carter didn't sleep much that night. Not because he was afraid, but because for the first time in a long while, his mind refused to stay in the dark. It kept moving, turning, reaching for possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to believe in for months. The metal box sat on the kitchen table, papers spread carefully around it like pieces of a puzzle too important to rush. Every few minutes, Samuel would glance at them again, just to make sure they were still real. By morning, one thing had become clear. Even if those documents were worth a fortune, they weren't money. Not yet. And time. Time was the one thing he didn't have. 21 days. That was all that stood between him and losing everything his family had built. So Samuel did the only thing he could do. He started making calls. The first was to a lawyer in town, Elliot Hayes, a quiet man in his late 60s who had once helped Samuel's mother with a land dispute years ago. Elliot arrived that afternoon, carrying a worn leather briefcase and the kind of patience that only comes from a lifetime of untangling other people's problems. He didn't say much at first, just sat at the table, carefully going through each document one by one, adjusting his glasses, taking notes, pausing longer than Samuel liked. Time stretched. Every second felt like it mattered. Finally, Elliot leaned back in his chair and let out a slow breath. "Well," he said softly. Samuel leaned forward. "Tell me straight." Elliot nodded. "All right, straight." Then he tapped one of the certificates lightly. "These are real." Samuel's chest tightened. "Government issued. Authentic, if they check out fully, and I believe they will, you're looking at a significant amount of money." "How much?" Elliot hesitated. Not because he didn't know, but because he understood what the number would mean. "Hard to say exactly without full verification," he said carefully. But conservatively, he looked Samuel in the eye. "Several $100,000, possibly more." The room went quiet. Not the empty kind of quiet. The kind that feels too full. Samuel let out a breath, slow and unsteady. "That's enough," he whispered. Elliot nodded. "Yes, it is." But then his expression changed. Just slightly. But that's not the whole story. Samuel's stomach tightened again. "It never is it?" Elliot gave a small, knowing smile. "No, it never is." He folded his hands together. "First, ownership. You bought the crate legally. Yes, but no one knew what was inside. There could be claims. Distant relatives. Legal complications." Samuel nodded slowly. "And if that happens, it delays everything. Time again. Always time. Second," Elliot continued, "these documents are old. Very old. Some of these companies may not even exist anymore. We'll have to trace them, verify successors, file claims. It's not quick." Samuel didn't interrupt. He could already feel the weight of it. "And third," Elliot said gently, "even if everything goes perfectly, converting this into usable cash will take months." There it was. The truth he had been trying not to think about. Months. He didn't have months. He had 3 weeks. Samuel leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling again. The same way he had in the barn. Hope, slipping just slightly through his fingers. "So it doesn't matter," he said quietly. Elliot didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood up slowly and walked to the window, looking out at the fields stretching beyond the house. Then he turned back. "You're looking at this the wrong way." Samuel frowned. "How?" Elliot stepped closer, placing one hand gently on the stack of papers. "You don't need to turn this into money?" Samuel blinked. "What?" "You just need to prove it exists." The words hung in the air. "Simple. But heavy," Elliot continued, his voice steady now. "These documents, if verified, even partially represent assets, real assets, enough to change how the bank sees you." Samuel sat up slowly. I mean, Elliot said, "you walk into that bank not as a man begging for time." He paused. "But as a man who has something they can't ignore." Samuel felt something shift inside him again. Not hope this time. Something stronger. Control. For months, everything had been happening to him. Now, for the first time, he had something to bring to the table, something to stand on. "Do you think they'll listen?" Samuel asked quietly. Elliot met his eyes. They'll have to. Samuel looked back down at the documents. At the handwriting. At the life someone had locked away 70 years ago, and somehow placed into his hands at exactly the moment he needed it most. He gathered the papers carefully, placing them back into the metal box with a kind of respect he hadn't even realized he felt. Because this wasn't just a second chance. It was a test. And tomorrow, he was going to walk into that bank and find out what it was worth. The next morning, Samuel Carter didn't rush. That might have been the first real sign that something inside him had changed. A week ago, he would have been pacing the floor before sunrise, heart racing, mind spinning through every worst-case scenario. But now, he moved slower. Not careless, just steady. He shaved. Put on a clean shirt, the one he used for church, though he hadn't been in months. Folded the documents carefully into a plain cardboard folder. No briefcase, no show. Just truth. The drive into town felt different too. The same roads, same fields, same sky stretching wide over Nebraska. But something about the way he held the steering wheel firm, but not tight, told a different story. He wasn't driving there to beg anymore. He was going to be heard. The bank building stood exactly as it always had. Brick walls, tall windows. A place that had quietly decided the fate of men like him for generations. Samuel stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of paper and polish. Behind the counter, a young teller glanced up. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Mr. Collins," Samuel said. She hesitated for a moment, just long enough for Samuel to recognize the look. The one that measured a man not by who he was, but by what the system had labeled him. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," he said calmly. "But he'll want to see me." Something in his voice must have landed, because a few minutes later, he was being led down the same hallway he had walked just weeks before, the day they handed him the notice. The door opened. Richard Collins, the bank manager, looked up from his desk. Tall, gray-haired, face set in that permanent expression of polite distance. "Mr. Carter," Collins said, leaning back slightly. "I assume you're here about the foreclosure." Samuel stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "I am," he said. Collins gestured toward the chair. "Then I'll be direct. The deadline stands, unless you have the funds." "I don't." Collins paused. Not surprised. Just confirming what he already believed. Samuel set the folder on the desk. "But I have something else." Collins didn't reach for it immediately. He just looked at Samuel, studying him. Then, slowly, he opened the folder. The room grew quiet. Not dramatic, not sudden, just still. Samuel watched as Collins's expression shifted almost imperceptibly at first. A slight narrowing of the eyes, a pause between pages, then longer pauses. He picked up one of the certificates, holding it closer to the light. Turned it. Checked the seal. Set it down, picked up another. Minutes passed. Finally, Collins looked up. Where did you get these?" Samuel didn't hesitate. "I bought a crate at an auction." Collins blinked once. "I'm not joking," Samuel added quietly. Collins leaned back in his chair, eyes still on the documents. "These could be significant," he said slowly. "If they're verified, they will be," Samuel replied. "Confidence. Not arrogance. Just certainty." Collins tapped his fingers lightly on the desk. Thinking. Calculating. "You understand," he said. "This doesn't change your current position. Not immediately. I understand. And you're still 3 weeks from foreclosure." "I know." Collins looked at him again. Different this time. Less like a problem. More like a variable. "What exactly are you asking for, Mr. Carter?" Samuel took a breath. Not deep, not shaky. Just enough. 90 days. Collins didn't respond right away. 90 days, Samuel repeated. To verify these assets. To begin the process of liquidation. In that time, I'll provide weekly updates from my attorney. Full transparency." He leaned forward slightly. "And at the end of those 90 days, I pay everything. Principal, interest, penalties. All of it." Silence filled the room again. But this time, it felt different. Like something was actually being weighed. Collins glanced down at the papers once more. Then back at Samuel. "You're asking me to delay legal proceedings, based on documents no one in this office has verified." "Yes, that's a risk." Samuel nodded. "It is." Collins studied him for a long moment, then asked the question that mattered most. "And why should I take that risk?" Samuel didn't look away. "Because doing nothing guarantees you lose." That landed. Not loudly, but clearly. Samuel continued, his voice steady. "If these are real, and they are, you get paid in full." He paused. "If they're not, you lose nothing you weren't already going to lose." Collins sat back, folding his hands. The room felt smaller now. He looked at the documents one last time, then closed the folder gently. 90 days, he said. Samuel's chest tightened, but he didn't react. "Not yet." "Not one more," Collins added. "And I want updates. Weekly, from your attorney. You'll have them." Collins nodded once. "And Mr. Carter?" Samuel stood, waiting. "If this turns out to be nothing, it won't." Collins held his gaze for a second longer, then gave a small nod. For the first time since this all began, Samuel walked out of that bank, not as a man being pushed out the door, but as a man who had just bought himself time. And sometimes, time is all a man needs to become someone entirely different. The next 3 months didn't feel like a miracle. They felt like work. Long days, longer nights, phone calls that led to more phone calls, forms that led to more forms, waiting, always waiting. But something had changed inside Samuel Carter. He wasn't chasing a miracle anymore. He was building one. Week by week, the pieces began to fall into place. The government confirmed the certificates real, every one of them. The stock papers harder. Some companies were gone, swallowed by time, but others had grown, changed names, merged into something bigger. And the oil rights. That was the one no one expected. A small plot of land in Texas that had been leased decades ago, quietly producing, quietly paying, into an account no one had touched. Not Harold Whitaker. Not anyone. For 70 years, it had just sat there, waiting. By the end of those 90 days, the numbers were no longer guesses. They were real. After taxes, after fees, after everything was untangled and turned into something a bank could understand, Samuel Carter was holding just over $520,000. More money than he had ever imagined having. More than enough to save his farm. He walked back into the bank on a clear winter morning. The kind where the air feels sharp but honest. This time, there was no hesitation at the door. No tight grip on the handle. No second thoughts. He stepped inside like he belonged there. Because now he did. Richard Collins looked up as Samuel entered his office. There was no surprise this time, just quiet recognition. Samuel set the check down on the desk. No speech. No explanation. Just the truth, written in numbers. Collins looked at it, then at Samuel, and for the first time, he smiled. It wasn't big, but it was real. "Well," he said softly, "I suppose you kept your word." Samuel nodded once. "So did you—" The loan was cleared that day. Every dollar, every ounce of pressure that had been sitting on Samuel's chest for months. Gone. Just like that. But here's the part most people wouldn't expect. That wasn't the moment that defined him. Not really. Because a week later, Samuel Carter did something no one saw coming. He went back to the bank. Same office, same desk, but this time, he wasn't there to save something. He was there to start something. The Miller farm, just east of his land, had been taken by the bank earlier that year, 140 acres. Good soil, A good man had lost it. A man named Thomas Miller? Samuel had known him for years. Not close, but close enough. Close enough to know what it looks like when someone loses everything. Samuel made an offer. Cash. Fair. No hesitation. The bank accepted before he finished speaking. But that wasn't the part people remembered. It was what came next. Samuel picked up the phone, called Thomas Miller, told him to meet him out by the land. When Thomas arrived, he didn't look Samuel in the eye at first. Men who lose everything rarely do. Samuel didn't waste words. I bought it, he said simply. Thomas nodded slowly. Figured someone would. Samuel took a breath, then said something that would echo far beyond that moment. I want you to farm it. Thomas looked up. Confused? What? Lease it, Samuel said. $1 an acre. You run it like it's yours. Thomas just stared at him. And when you're ready, Samuel continued, when things turn around. He paused. I'll sell it back to you. Same price I paid, not $1 more. The wind moved softly through the dry grass between them. Thomas's voice, when it came, was rough. Why would you do that? Samuel didn't answer right away. He looked out across the land, then back at the man standing in front of him. Because someone left something for me, when I needed it most. He paused. They just never knew who they were leaving it for. Thomas's eyes filled before he could stop them. And in that moment, it wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't about luck. It wasn't even about the crate. It was about something quieter, something deeper. The idea that sometimes what we keep isn't meant for us. It's meant for the moment someone else needs it most. Anyone can change their life if they're willing to trust what others ignore. As the sun set over his fields, Samuel Carter no longer saw himself as a man who got lucky, but as someone chosen to carry something forward. The crate was gone, but what it gave him wasn't. Because now, somewhere in his barn, there's another box waiting. Waiting for someone else, at the exact moment they need it most. Because the real gift was never the money. It was the chance to pass it on. The end. Up next, more powerful stories are waiting. Click to continue and subscribe if you believe one decision can change everything.